There's a cartoon by Gary Larson. He's actually one of my heroes. It's a big concert hall like this. It's packed, just as this is. And on the stage, there's a full orchestra. Everyone's dressed in tuxedos, long dresses, and everybody's waiting. There's a grand piano right in the middle, and there's an elephant, also in a tuxedo, sitting at the grand piano. And he's frozen. His eyes are wide like this. And he's saying, "What the hell am I doing here? I'm a violinist, for Christ's sake." What I love about that cartoon is the strangeness of it. But I actually sort of sometimes I wonder what I'm doing in an environment like this as well. Because certainly from the morning session, when you think about how those designers, in particular the morning session, we all do something that influences real people. But when people are able to improve the material circumstances of real people, that is an amazing kind of design. As a cartoonist, I'm dealing with ideas. I'm dealing with the what if, the hypothetical. I'm also dealing with exaggeration, hyperbole, in order to focus a little more closely on things that really are happening and maybe, just maybe, actually influence, on occasion, real things that happen to real people. And as it is, I did start out as an activist, and I think that's certainly what makes me tick. And I'll take you back to 1986. This is a cartoon that I did for the United Democratic Front, which was the sort of above-ground version of the African National Congress. At the time, South Africa was in real turmoil. I only have one cartoon from this period to show you because that's really what started me off, and that's how I got involved in the issues and started to work with people, which is what drives all the cartoons that I've ever done. And it was a cartoon about everything that the struggle, the good things about the struggle. You can see the kind of celebratory aspect, but you can also see the police, and you can see the police and you can see the army. I don't know if you can see that's the police and that's the army, and there were many issues involved in this cartoon. People started to write their own slogans on any blank space they could find. It's also a cartoon that was maybe about the fifth image that I did that was banned. In the old days, in the apartheid era, things could be banned by the regime. And this one was banned, and they immediately came, the police and security police came looking for me, and they came looking for this image as well, to confiscate it. And I went into hiding, and then we had to get a disguise. My wife, who's sitting here, was then my girlfriend. She's actually, there we are, in those days. But I got a disguise where she tried to dye my hair blonde. It went orange. It looked really weird. Then she re-dyed it, and I grew a little goatee beard. We dyed that. I had glasses. It was a pretty good disguise. But that was the kind of circumstance. Eventually, I came out of hiding in my disguise. I worked like that for a while. I got a bit complacent. There are about 20 stories I could tell you about this one. I'm trying to keep this one very short. But I finally did get caught by the security police a year and a half later when I was least expecting it. And the first thing they asked me was, if you look around, you'll see pigs. Pigs are police, and you'll see some of the security police, the spies. And they said, "Why do you draw us as pigs?" And I said, "I draw what I see," it's a true story. And then they put me in solitary confinement. The reason they put me there was really because I was only prepared to answer questions about myself, not about my colleagues. And the last thing I'll tell you about this, and I'm just restraining myself because there were many things. But the guy up on the roof, the reason he's there, he's a really crazy character, also called Jonathan Shapiro. By some strange circumstance, we were working in this little organization together. And I realized immediately that the security police actually thought I was him because they were asking me questions, and he was on the Nelson Mandela Birthday Committee organizing for Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday, and I wasn't. I left the country to go study after I was released from detention without trial, and two and a half years later, I arrived back. I was at a party, and there I saw Jojo, as he was known. I said, "Hey, Jojo, you know that they detained me because they thought I was you?" He said, "No shit. While you were away, they detained me because they thought I was you." I said, "Okay, we quit." We were moving into an era at last. Well, it actually came quicker than we expected. And Nelson Mandela embodied both the struggle and he embodied the new democracy. So this was actually drawn on the 27th of April, 1994, as we became a democracy. And it's about optimism. It's light versus dark. It's good versus evil. It's all of those things. It's an easy image to understand. Celebratory images were part of what I was doing. When Nelson Mandela turned 80, I happened to be lucky enough to be at a celebration. He invited us to a celebration in Johannesburg. I live in Cape Town. And Jacques Chirac, of all people, not necessarily a lefty, but he was there and he gave a speech. And I credit his speechwriter with talking about revelation, struggle, suffering, achievement, which were the sort of four quadrants of Nelson Mandela's life up to the age of 80. I thought it was very powerful, so I did that. It was also a time of having to account in some way. White people did not account enough for what happened during apartheid. And there were also black people who were pulled into that system of repression. They were pulled into it by circumstance, and it was a savage time that we went through. We had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who's somebody I also got to know really well, an amazing man. This was sort of just, there's one cartoon about it. There's that cliff of truth and hopefully reconciliation, but there's that chasm. And as the Arch, as we call him, led the perpetrators and the victims and the media and the rest of us up that path, hoping to go from truth to reconciliation, we discovered a lot of truth and some reconciliation, but not enough. There's always that gap. It's very, very difficult. But the kinds of things that, just to go back to what I said about, being the elephant who's on the stage and he thinks what am I doing here? I'm a violinist. These issues that I deal with, truth, reconciliation, hate speech, free speech, repression, development, government spin, hypocrisy, refugees, migrants. They're sometimes specific, they're sometimes universal, and many of them, some of the cartoons, and I wish I could show you more and tell you more stories, but some of them have the most incredible intersection with reality, which I don't always anticipate. So I'm going to whiz you through some of these issues that touch on many of the issues that other people have talked about, and they're all things that I get involved in, and occasionally, as I say, I will tell you this. The Cartoonist Rights Network International, which is a group that looks at cartooning all over the world, has said that South African cartooning, editorial cartooning, has had a greater impact on our political discourse in our country than any other democracy they've come across in the last 20 years. So that was really something that impressed me, and I was amazed and very happy to hear that. We have really managed to make some sort of impact. White people, as I said, were not taking apologizing or seriously enough. And during the big sort of race debate that started around about 2000 when Thabo Mbeki became president, there were many white people who said, I was too young, I didn't know what was happening, I was out of the country, they were lying to us. And I got tired of it and I did this one, Whites Who Never Benefited from Apartheid, which was the best drawing I did on the subject. And I had many, many drawings, which I planned to do. I was trying to figure out what to do. I suddenly realized that said a lot more than any actual drawing I could do or anything that had a lot more words. And it did make quite a lot of impact, and it became a big talking point. But occasionally cartooning is just about pure communication, and sometimes you don't need a drawing. Drawings can be all kinds of things. They don't have to be elaborate, and they don't even have to have anything drawn in them. So it's a strange and wonderful discipline that we work in. Corruption became a massive issue. In 1999, South Africa tried to acquire a lot of arms. And you know that arms deals are corrupt all over the world. This is what I did around that time, just after. There's then and now. Then, of course, the the old cliche of the wagons circling. You had that in America, you had that in South Africa, the colonial defending of the white regime. And the new elite riding around in those 4x4s, because the first version of the corruption that we saw was massive discounts on vehicles, 4x4s, luxury vehicles for people, for fat cat politicians. Thabo Mbeki by now was president. He was somebody who had started the arms deal, but he also is very well known for a few other things, in particular for his AIDS denialism, which started as well in 1999. That is just one of the many drawings I did of Thabo Mbeki, but there you see it says AIDS, crime, corruption, and unemployment. He appointed a health minister, a woman called Manto Shabalala Msimang, who had been a conventional doctor on HIV and AIDS, and somehow he converted her into an AIDS denialist as well. And she started handing out vegetable remedies instead of antiretrovirals. 350,000 people died, according to UN figures, who didn't need to die because, amongst many things, there was not antiretrovirals, nevirapine for mother-to-child HIV transmission, to prevent that mother-to-child HIV transmission. But they've put the figure at 350,000. So there was, this is the cartoon I did about that. All these vegetables prevent the rollout of antiretrovirals, true or false? African potato, beetroot, lemon, garlic, manto. False. Lemon is not a vegetable. And the strange thing about that cartoon, and there's a sort of, sometimes there's that double reaction, especially in South Africa, people laugh at seeing manto as this vegetable, and then that bottom line makes a lot more cutting. I didn't have the bottom line when I did the cartoon. I was busy doing it, and I suddenly thought, wait a minute, lemon is not a vegetable. And that for me was that lateral thinking. It's one of the reasons that for me is my favorite cartoon I did on HIV and AIDS on a very serious subject, is that the lateral thinking kicked in when I was least expecting it. And that's the process that I would love to understand how it happens, but when it does happen, it's the best thing that can happen to any kind of designer or anyone working in any field creatively. You don't know when the real spark will hit you, and that one is how it happened there. Thabo Mbeki was also protecting his police minister. Again, somebody who was head of Interpol and completely corrupt, a man called Jackie Celebi. The Lion King. Co-starring, there's Thabo Mbeki, of course, as the Lion, co-starring reward-winning Jackie Celebi, and soon featuring Jacob Simba in I Just Can't Wait to Be King. There you see the Jacob Zuma with the little double bump there and the sort of widened eyes that I'd started to draw him with. Jacob Zuma had been pegged as someone who actually had some things to hide around the arms deal and corruption since the end of 2002. And by this time, sort of around about 2007, well actually 2006, so he was known to be corrupt. And then suddenly he was charged with rape. He was acquitted, but during his rape trial he made the famous statement that they said, what happened? Well, he had consensual sex with somebody he knew to be HIV positive, and then what did you do after that? Oh, I had a shower. Why? To lessen your chance of infection. He had been head of the National AIDS Council, so he certainly should have known better. And that became a very famous thing, and I started playing with the shower and putting it. But at the end of the rape trial, I started putting a shower on his head, which you'll see in a second. But at the end of the rape trial, he sued, he was acquitted, and then he sued a whole lot of people in media and a whole lot of individuals and a whole lot of actual media groups. 63 million rands worth of charges. That's a lot of rands. I could do the maths, and 15 million of those was mine, which apparently was a world record. It was twice as much as anyone had ever been sued for cartoons in the world, because it was $2 million US, and the previous record was 1 million. A weird record to hold, and it meant nothing, because eventually, after 6 years, he dropped the charges, and so in a sense, we won. The cartoon I did immediately was, he said, I'm suing for damage to my reputation. Would that be your reputation as a disgraced chauvinistic demagogue who can't control his sexual urges and who thinks a shower prevents AIDS? Which, of course, could have drawn another lawsuit. And apart from anything else, my editors were very worried that I was putting the same 3 cartoons that he'd sued me for back in print, because I just thought I had to do it. So I just wanted to say I'm still here as well. Thank you. And I also want to say that the media in South Africa is feisty, and the media in many places where we're fighting against corruption, where we're fighting against all sorts of things, there are many of us who do that sort of thing. 2 years later, now Jacob Zuma is trying to become president with the help of a bunch of allies around him who are prepared to say and do almost anything to get the corruption charges dropped. 783 corruption charges. And they were trying to get them dropped in a sort of a judicial solution, as opposed to a political solution, sort of hiding as masquerading as a judicial one. So there was one particular court case which was about to come up, and I did this cartoon. Go for it, boss. It's an incredibly scary image. You can see it's a potential gang rape situation. And I thought long and hard about whether to do it, because that is the situation that many, many women in South Africa actually find themselves in. And Jacob Zuma had, of course, been charged with rape and been acquitted. So there were many reasons why it became an explosive, huge event, this cartoon itself. And there were many questions about, there was one politician who said the woman in the cartoon is white. Is Zapiro saying Zuma's going to go out and rape white women? Now, I challenge you on that woman. Is she white? She certainly, to me, she was intended to be either black or just representative of the country, more black perhaps than white. But those were the kinds of things. He sued me for the second time, 7 million rand for that cartoon, eventually 5 million. That lasted 4 years, the case, and it became much, much bigger as a case than the previous case had become. And this one day before it was due to go to court, he eventually dropped all the charges after his lawyers had asked us to apologize, asked us whether we could share costs, and we said, no way. You sued us. We want to see this stuff go to court because we have a fantastic case to show that you were, in fact, bullying and threatening the judiciary. So, okay, Jacob Zuma then, in fact, manages to get the charges dropped. He becomes president. What do I do now? I'm one of the many critics. So I say, okay, I'll give him a little bit of a break. I'll lift the shower. People have been starting to say, you've got to take the shower off. It's infra-dig. You can't do that to somebody who's a president. And that's not the reason. I just thought I'll play with the shower. I'll make it go up and down. And if he's really good, maybe it'll start sort of moving away and floating away. If he's really bad, it'll come back with a bang. This lasted 8 months. He was making good speeches on HIV and AIDS, but he was a total hypocrite. He was breaking all the rules that he was making for everyone else. He had 2 more children out of wedlock. He already had 4 marriages. But I just thought I can't carry on. He gave the State of the Nation address, and I did that one. Which is a kind of a clear statement that, shower's back, that's for sure. And then I did this one, which was my favorite, baby shower. Those of you from South Africa, you can count. At that stage, there were 20 offspring. Of course, they weren't all babies anymore, but in fact, there were 20 official offspring. There were, at that stage, already 12 unofficial. And as I always say, he spent a lot of time in the Ukraine, so he had, in exile, sowed a lot of wild oats. And in fact, there's another 2 official now. So 22 official, 12 unofficial. So this is a man who certainly doesn't live by the principles that he wanted the rest of us to live. So it was the hypocrisy rather than the personal morality that I was really savaging here. And it made a nice impact. But we put it on T-shirts, and as funny and light-hearted as that image looks, people are scared to wear that T-shirt. And that's the way things have changed in South Africa since the time of Nelson Mandela, who really loved satire and loved cartoons. But of course, it's not only in South Africa that we see the impact of cartoons. In 2006, I was at the World Economic Forum. I always say that not knowing whether to be proud of it or whether to be a little embarrassed, because as a cartoonist, it's kind of weird to be at the World Economic Forum. But we were trying to show cartoons that were always edgy. I was there when the Danish prophet Muhammad cartoon Furore exploded. I was sitting opposite two Egyptian cabinet ministers who were certainly very angry, and they asked me, they said, what do you think about this idea of somebody drawing the prophet? I said, I absolutely believe that people should be able to draw whoever they want to draw, real, religious figures, whatever. I supported their right to do it. My editors, when I immediately came back, said to me, please don't draw the prophet. And I said, well, I reserve the right to draw the prophet if I have a reason to do so. I didn't draw the prophet during that time. This is one of the cartoons I did. And that's religious minefield. As you see, all the religions, I really regard organized religion as waiting to be offended. All of them. All different groupings of them. The Hindus, the Jews, I'm Jewish as well, the Catholics, the Protestants, the Muslims, they tend to have male patriarchs who are just waiting for those little triggers to go off. All those little sort of mind triggers to go off. And so I have a very, very strong feeling about that. And in fact, in 2010, I did do a Prophet Muhammad cartoon because I felt that by this time, it was time to actually reassert freedom of speech. And I got 6 individual death threats for that. And I had to get police protection. It's not as if they were outside the house all the time, but they were on speed dial and all of that. And it was a very scary time. I was flown up to Johannesburg to meet people from the Muslim community. I asked them, I said, well, do you believe in freedom of expression? Yes. What about drawing the prophet? No. So I said, that's an absolute contradiction. Call it what you like, that was what it is. And so I do have a problem with how organized religion behaves. And what that does is that incites people who are fanatics to do terrible, terrible things. The dogma of organized religion is what gives those people the kind of right. They think they have the right to do whatever they do. So the violence comes not from the satirists, not from the cartoonists, not from the people making opinions or talking about things. The violence comes from people who are waiting to be offended, sometimes in the strangest possible way. We saw that when the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists and some of the other people were killed. Absolutely terrible. Colleagues of mine, it was a terrifying thing to have happened, and that was one of my response cartoons. But I did another response cartoon, do-it-yourself freedom of expression, Je suis Charlie. So if you draw that, you'll get the prophet. And I always I wondered how many Muslim people did it. Because I'm sure there are people, even devout Muslims, who also want to challenge the doctrinaire approach that comes from some of the sort of the patriarchal authorities. So again, Paris is one of the many places that suffered. When the Paris attacks happened more recently, that's a fairly conventional cartoon, but one that expressed the horror. But because I come from the developing world, and I see the anomaly of the way that people respond when something happens in Paris or London or New York, compared to how they respond when things happen in other places, I did this one as well. Remember how all the buildings were lit up? So good to see. Lit for 129 people killed in last week's Paris terror attacks. Right? So very nice to see that. Don't hold your breath. Lit for 25,404 people killed in terror attacks in 2014, same year, in just 5 nations. Nigeria, 7,500. Pakistan, 1,700. Syria, almost 1,700. Iraq, 9,929. Afghanistan, 4,500. So I do those kind of cartoons to sort of show the anomaly of the way that people respond. But here's another one that was simply responding to the horror, and this was very recently, the Belgian attack. And of course, for me, my huge influence, as many cartoonists, Tintin or Kofi or Tintin, and I didn't do Tintin looking on. I did Tintin as representing the Belgian people, and Snowy, his dog, as people crying for what had happened. It's actually, those of you who know the Tintin books very well, this is a drawing from Tintin in Tibet, but just put into other clothes, because it was one that lives in my consciousness a lot. And interestingly, Hergé moved as a person from being someone who's influenced by fascism and by paternalism and racism in his early days to someone who had great humanity in his later years. So I found that very important as well. On our continent of Africa, the same issues. This is terrifying. I read a report saying that Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and Al-Qaeda, there was some collaboration now in these different parts of Africa, these very, very fanatical sort of Muslim-inspired movements, but I don't want to call them, they certainly, according to Muslim clerics, they are not doing what Muhammad would, clearly these people are out there as religious fanatics are in every way, doing things that are not part of the religion at all. So many people are fleeing Africa, as we, again, coming to some of these other issues that many people have been dealing with. People are fleeing the Middle East and fleeing Africa because of these things at the very time when strange things are happening in Europe. So there's Europe or bust. They're going there as they land, Europe bust. And that happened to be during the time that Greece was pretty much on its knees. So you have this, there were many people coming to Europe at exactly the time when there were people who didn't know whether they could stay or what was happening. It was just a sort of a typical kind of cartooning moment. In Turkey, Aylan Kurdi, the famous image inspired that cartoon where, although some people said this is unfair, some people in the European Union are trying to help. Just the feeling of this little child who represented so many people, the many people who had died or were dying, drownings and other deaths, trying to escape their circumstance. And then you have what happened recently in Orlando. You see, end homophobia, stop the hate, ban assault rifles, and of course striding through is the sort of Nazi version of Donald Trump, ban Muslims. I mean, that's his answer. So instead of trying to stop the hate, he is one of those forces and there are many of them in the world, that are inciting hatred. Okay, so the last few, back to us, back to South Africa. And it's not only back to South Africa because the issues are global. I did a cartoon recently about Jacob Zuma and another organ of state. He has been trying to capture organs of state to do with them what he wants to do. And he's put puppets in position and all that sort of thing. So I did a cartoon which apparently has received some publicity here even. And so I will show it to you. And the organ of state is the National Prosecuting Authority. He put a puppet guy in there to try and keep those charges away so that he'll never ever be charged with them. So there's another state organ, the National Prosecuting Authority, another organ grinder's monkey. And that man's name is Sean Abrams. Now you'll see there are two people in that cartoon. The one is the big one, the real target, that's Jacob Zuma. The other one is the puppet or the organ grinder's monkey, Sean Abrams. He happens to be black. So does Jacob Zuma. I cannot do a cartoon like that anymore. There's too much toxicity in the environment, and it's been sort of taken away from me, the chance to actually play with the cartoon I did in 2010, where you had the white apartheid regime, Verwoerd, Forster, P.W. Botha, F.W. de Klerk, the apex, the best, being Nelson Mandela, as we had democracy, and a descent again, Thabo Mbeki, Jacob Zuma. That cartoon didn't create any furore at all. People thought it was a great cartoon, and I can't do these things anymore. So the very last few, why are they doing this? It's because of lack of delivery, not caring for the poor. There was a Blue Light Brigade, Jacob Zuma's henchmen, roughed up. They grabbed a guy who gave the finger to the Blue Light Brigade. They took him in, they put a hood over his head, they roughed him up. So that represents a lot, that cartoon. And what else are they doing? They're also shutting down freedom of speech. We've had tremendous freedom of speech in South Africa. They're trying to bring in a secrecy bill. And they are also, I mean, Jacob Zuma, I sort of imagine him rattling around in the union buildings, running for his own shadow, right through his presidency. He probably will get to the end without There's about three more.
Jonathan, I'm so sorry, because I know we'd all love to. They're so brilliant.
Okay, can I jump to the last one?
Go for the last one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Jacob Zuma in his money pool, Jacob Zuma apologizing, the ANC accepting. These are our satirical puppets that we do. This is a cartoon we couldn't get published in America, but we could get published in South Africa when Bill Clinton came. And the last one, Nelson Mandela, when he met his puppet, the difference between Nelson Mandela and the kind of people we have now, he didn't know this puppet was coming. I walked up, stuck the puppet's hand out, and he said, "Oh, I believe I've met this gentleman before." The very last one, "Hear ye, the enemy approaches." You see government, crime and corruption, then all the arrow sounds. I hate this job, which I don't, but thank you very much.